From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The Commission on Presidential Debates sets the dates and terms for its 2024 TV events, but will anybody show up to debate next year? Plus, Democrats browbeat Univision for doing a friendly interview with Donald Trump. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnist Kim Strassel and editorial board member Monet Ukwe-Barua. Since 1988, the general election presidential debates, the terms of them have been set by the nonprofit, nonpartisan Commission on Presidential Debates. And on Monday, it set forth the rules, the dates, the places that it intends to hold those. One starting in September 16th, 2024 in Texas. The last one, October 9th, 2024 in Salt Lake City, Utah, and explaining the terms of how candidates are supposed to qualify for those. Kim, one thing that makes this interesting, though, is the Republican Party has already signaled that it does not think that the commission did a great job in handling the 2020 debates, long-running complaints. And last year, the Republican National Committee voted to no longer participate in the commission's events. And so it seems to me there's a little bit of jockeying going on here, the commission trying to retain the role that it feels that it rightfully has in this presidential election process, but more uncertainty about how and whether these candidates will debate than I think we've seen in a long time.
This has been coming to a head for a very long time. There's long been Republican grousing about how these presidential debates are handled. One big complaint, although it's one that's shared a little bit by both parties, is the complaint that these debates tend to take place too late in the season to actually catch any of those early voters. And that's been a growing problem as more and more states expand their early voting. And for some of them, having it weeks and weeks before actual election day. So if you're not having a debate until right before that election day happens, and there's some late breaking news that happens in these presidential debates, it's too late for voters to change their mind. And, this was a complaint, particularly for Republicans in 2020, because a lot of this was coming out and there was a discussion about it in the two debates that happened between Trump and Biden about Hunter Biden's laptop. So that's one complaint. The other is just more, a lot of Republicans feel as though the moderators who are chosen for these debates are often using Democratic or liberal talking points in terms of the questions they ask and their approach to the candidates up on stage. The fact that the RNC has said it isn't going to formally take part, it doesn't necessarily mean there won't be debates. The presidential campaigns themselves can certainly and do negotiate the details, but it's a strong showing of disapproval of the whole process and would likely make whatever ultimate Republican candidate more wary about taking part.
To dig into a couple of those complaints, so looking back at the 2020 timeline, the first debate between President Trump and President Biden was on September 29th. And by then, according to the data, about 1 million people had already cast ballots. North Carolina started mailing out absentee votes to voters on September 4th. And so the commission seems to be a little bit responsive to that. Again, its first debate planned for 2024 is September 16th. However, Monet, by that point, again, I think there will still be people who already have received ballots potentially and are marking them up and sending them in. And I understand why people don't want 2-3 months of presidential debates between the two nominees, the way that we have sometimes in these party primaries. On the other hand, that's kind of the way the election system is going with this move to early voting and mail voting. And so it seems like they should be more responsive to that and at least have one debate before these states are sending ballots out to be filled in.
That's right. The shift towards early voting that we've seen since the 2020 election makes it imperative that the debates start really as early as possible. You want as many voters as possible to be casting their votes, having actually seen the candidates take tough questions live and go head to head with one another, presenting their competing visions for how they'd run the country, as opposed to just the ads that they put out and the talking points that they discuss at their own rallies. So the debates really should be early enough to form the opinions of even the earliest general election voters. I do think that one of the reasons why the committee was willing to push back only to about mid-September is because the Democratic National Convention is going to take place in late August, I believe. And so it's probable that they want to leave a little bit of time between when both candidates are formally nominated by their parties and when the debate takes place. So that makes a certain amount of sense. And I do think that you do still have a lot more voters tuning into the election process as you get closer to November. So it makes sense to have those last two debates closer to election day. But I think that the committee probably could have stood to go even a week earlier, say the first week of September, for that first debate, in light of how much of the election is going to actually be set in stone by that point, because people are casting their ballots so early.
Kim, on the point about the moderators, it seems to me that there are other ways to run a debate. It seems like the moderators are chosen by kind of a beltway mentality. And one option, if you have a negotiation between the campaigns, might be you pick a moderator and we'll pick a moderator. Or how about we have no moderators and we ask each other questions, having the sort of debate where there's a TV anchor who is there doling out 30 seconds to each candidate is not the only way to run this kind of televised clash between the two nominees, and maybe not even the best way. So, I mean, that's an opportunity here too. If we break out of this commission's hold on this process, is you may have a debate that looks different from the debates that we've had in recent decades.
Sure. This commission's been around since 1988. I think we can all agree that, over 30 or 40 years, there's certainly room for improvement and change. And this is something the RNC has certainly done and taken into an account as part of its own process for running its primary campaign debates, being much more picky in terms of the television outlets that it's using to go with, the people that are involved in asking the questions. And it's a tricky balance. You want to make sure that these debates are reaching a broad spectrum of voters, many of whom might watch different television stations. But I love the idea of the format too. Some of these formats simply are not conducive to allowing voters to hear the issues that they care about, especially not in any depth when you're doing these 30-second responses, as you say. So let's think about who does the moderation. Let's think about the format and whether or not there shouldn't be a whole different approach with longer answers. Maybe something like a town hall where people are asking questions. Anyone who has ever watched British Question Time, when the Prime Minister comes and is actually engaging in an actual debate, understands that what the American version is a pretty poor substitute. There has to be some ways to improve this process. And this is a golden opportunity given the kind of blow up that has preceded this.
Mene, what do you make of the incentives, though, that we foresee for these candidates going into 2024? Donald Trump has skipped the Republican primary debate so far, and it does not seem to have tanked his candidacy. And so if he is the nominee, it seems to me that he would probably take a lesson from that. And so that would be one thing weighing against him participating in these debates. Another might be if he does not want to participate in the debates held by the commission, he wants a direct negotiation with the Biden campaign, he might insist on that. And we might have an impasse there. President Biden, for his part, Mene, just turned 81, and the debates in 2020 were not his standout performance. That's not why he won. I think they were a detriment to his campaign, but nonetheless, he succeeded, and now he is 4 years older. He might be looking for an excuse in 2024 not to get on a stage in a direct confrontation with President Trump, and the spat over whether to take the commission's rules or not might be just the excuse his campaign needs.
Well, it's an interesting question what Trump's approach to the general election debates in 2024 is going to be. And I frankly think it really comes down to whether he's leading or trailing in the polls against Joe Biden at that time. It is true that Trump has skipped the Republican primary debates in this cycle, and I really think that that's because he has such a commanding lead. He thinks, frankly, I'm able to communicate directly with my supporters through Truth Social and other platforms. He gets a ton of free press coverage and doesn't need to put himself out there in front of the broadcast TV screens the way that these other candidates do to get attention. And he thinks that the likelihood that I'm going to do something to hurt myself is much higher than the idea that I'm going to do something to really even increase my lead over what it already is in some of these primary polls. And so that's why he's skipped out on those. But his incentives could be very different going up against Joe Biden in a general if the race is tight, and particularly if he's behind. I think that he, in that case, might definitely think, I want to take Biden to task. I want to show voters how sleepy he's gotten, how old and how tired he is compared with Trump, who obviously is no young man himself, but is much more vigorous. I could see Trump really wanting to lean into that distinction and thinking it's something that would help him. I think that that definitely was his approach in 2020 going up against Joe Biden. It didn't quite play out that way. Trump maybe was even a little bit too aggressive in the debates in a way that turned voters off. But I think that it's not set in stone that Trump doesn't want to debate at all. It's possible that he could see that as something that could really help him. Whereas Biden, on the other hand, I think probably would love to have an excuse not to debate. Again, he is hiding from the cameras as much as possible, given his age and sometimes incoherence. But I think that he also is kind of an institutional man and is going to want to abide by the tradition of being willing to debate, and also thinks that there's a good chance that his contrast against Trump will be quite good. And so I do think that whether it's through the commission or whether it's one-on-one, the likely outcome is still that these two campaigns are going to agree to some mutually agreeable terms and that the debates would happen. But it will depend a lot on how the race shapes up between now and that time.